This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
I just received a letter from a student who thanked me for instilling the love of math in him. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and a very special welcome to two new members of the Senate of Virginia. Scott Surovell is new to the Senate, but not new to the General Assembly, having served in the House. Jeremy McPike is new to the Senate following the legendary Chuck Colgan, who I guess had the longest tenure in the Virginia Senate of any senator from the history of the Commonwealth, at least as far as we know, at least in modern history. So I appreciate both of you being on. The session's underway. We really want you to help our viewers around the Commonwealth know the areas of Virginia that you represent, and then to get into some of the legislation that you're working on. Scott, we'll start with you since you have a higher rank and seniority since you came over to the House. The new members draw, but the ones coming from the other chamber, it's based on their seniority. So we'll start with you and then go to Jeremy.
Right, so yeah, I had 6 years of service coming in. I represented the 44th District in the Virginia House of Delegates from 2010 until just yesterday. And the Senate seat that I was just elected to starts up in Fairfax County, kind of near the I-495 along the river, the Potomac River, runs down the Route 1 corridor, has a part of Kingstown in Fairfax County, comes down the Route 1 corridor, picks up Mason Neck, which is right there at the Fairfax County Prince William line. It goes into Prince William County. One string of it runs up through Occoquan, up towards Dale City. It wraps around through Woodbridge, picks up Dumfries and Triangle, goes up 234, picks up the community called Montclair, all of Prince William Forest Park, all of the Quantico Marine Corps Base, and then it has sort of two tendrils that stretch into Stafford County, one to the east, one to the west, about 8,000 people down there. So that's the district, 200,000 people. It's about 60 miles long. It's a good district, a lot of Potomac Riverfront, a lot of state parks, a lot of federal wildlife refuges. It's a great place, It's a very diverse district, very unique part of Fairfax County, very unique part of Northern Virginia.
I like the way you described it. I'm thinking it would be trouble to draw it the way you said it. But yeah. Jeremy, what about your district?
Well, mine will be a little shorter description than Scott's. So the 29th Senate District runs from basically Dale City, and if you've driven along 95, it's Potomac Mills Mall. Basically that area, and it follows westward to Manassas, city of Manassas and Manassas Park, sort of the mid part of Prince William County where I grew up in Dale City. So that's the district. Excited to represent the area I grew up in. Senator Colgan was my senator growing up over the last 40 years, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So what about some legislation, Scott?
Well, so far I've put in, I think, about 35 bills, something like that, and there's a lot to talk about. A couple are repeats. Some of the stuff I'm really excited about, some of the new stuff I'm working on. One was in the paper just the other day, has to do with trying to help prisoner reentry. Once people have served their time, completed their sentence, as long as they've been law-abiding, it would alleviate, it would allow a person who's completed probation, paid their fines, to file a petition with a circuit court asking the court to remove all the collateral consequences of their conviction. Doesn't apply to violent crimes, doesn't apply to sex offenses, but it would apply to sort of nonviolent felonies, sort of drug offenses, property crimes, things like that. But you could go to court, ask them to take away the civil consequences, so it would be easier for you to get a job. And then the court would give you a certificate you could give to your employer that the employer could use in a court if they're ever sued to say they shouldn't have hired you. And we need to do something to make it easier for people to re-enter society once they've paid their price, served their time, as long as they haven't re-offended, committed more felonies, or they don't have a long string in their history of this. That's one thing I'm trying to do.
Yeah, let me ask you about that, because I think I maybe saw the same article. So that's not the same as what they call ban the box.
No. No, ban the box has to do with simply prohibiting mainly the government. I don't think anybody's proposed it for private employers yet, but prohibiting the government from asking about whether or not you have a felony conviction when you're applying for a job.
Right.
This is different because under state law, there's actually hundreds of collateral consequences that come along with a conviction, even of a misdemeanor. And a lot of times it can be a barrier for people to get even the most basic employment. I've had people tell me they couldn't get a job working at a grocery store because of an assault and battery conviction, and there's other things, like, for example, if you're convicted of a felony, there's certain licenses you can't get. Like, for example, to sell people mortgages, sometimes be things like a realtor. And so this would make it easier for people to get a job, get employed, support their families. That's one thing I'm working on that I'm really hopeful that we might get something done on. There's another issue that Jeremy and I sort of have in common. His district comes pretty close down to mine in the Potomac River. We're having a big dispute over a coal ash dump on a power plant. I don't know if there was a big coal ash spill in the Dan River in Southside Virginia. There was a huge one in Tennessee back in 2008. There's about 3-point-some million cubic yards of coal ash stored about 1,000 yards in the Potomac River and Quantico Creek. And because the new EPA rules, they need to do things to remediate it because it's sitting there leaching out hexavalent chromium, cadmium, boron, lead, arsenic. And I would like that stuff to be picked up, hauled away, and put in a modern landfill. Right now, current state law, it seems like, allows them to leave it in place and put a cap on it. And so I've introduced legislation to require them to dig it up, haul it away, which is exactly what the legislature in North Carolina required Duke Power to do at their 14 sites all around North Carolina. It wouldn't put us in any competitive disadvantage. It wouldn't cost Dominion taxpayers anything. They'd spread the cost out to ratepayers. But to me, it's a common sense thing to do to protect our fishery, to protect the environment, to protect groundwater, property values. This stuff is being stored in a 1980s era dump right now that isn't properly lined. It doesn't meet modern standards, and I'm worried, if we leave it there, we might create a Superfund site. So that's another thing I'm working on. And as I said, I've got a whole slew of bills.
Yeah, well, we'll get Jeremy in. We'll come on back. Jeremy, what?
Well, my agenda is a little slimmer than Scott's 30 or 40, but they're really focused on sort of the three things that have impacted my life. The first is a commuter. I commute from Dale City to Alexandria for work every day, and so it really is working towards a package of commuter fairness issues, whether it's fees that are charged for hot lanes for your transponder. You get charged $10 after 6 months if you don't use the flex portion of the pass, to the actual tiered fines and fees, and whether or not you've received a notice that you're in violation, and seeing how those are tiered in fines. And so there's a slew of those things that people are frustrated with, especially in a heavy commuter area that both Scott and I share in Northern Virginia, that really, when folks interact with state government, they want it to be as simple as possible. That's why I've also introduced expanding the state inspection for the first 2 years for new cars. They've been inspected by the manufacturer. They've gone through this process. To also looking at ways we can streamline our state inspection sticker process to use the plates and stickers we already have on our plates. We have three different processes. In Northern Virginia, we also have to go through emissions. And so the number of interactions that we have to do as a driver, as a commuter, through the regulatory process, the way we can simplify that, we've got to explore that. And so it really is about commuter fairness from one real important point. The second is education. I've got 3 girls in schools. So me and my wife see education every day, looking to simplify, testing requirements, both in SOLs, watching my 10-year-old go through an anxiety attack the night before, math test was really frustrating. And so I've heard that from a lot of parents on how we can simplify, reduce down the number of tests, which is critically important, and also make sure we restore cost to compete for the region, which is critical to get dollars to make sure they go to the classroom. And so Those are the first two, and the last is public safety. As a firefighter for the last 16 years, I've been involved and seen a number of different things. So we're looking at ways to include colorectal cancer as a cancer presumption for firefighters, as well as closing a loophole. I lost a friend of mine years ago who was a firefighter, died before she was certified as a firefighter, and the state denied her family line of duty death benefits, even though she was in a Virginia State Fire Program Firefighter 1 class. And so we went through a long legal battle to try to get, and finally did after 3 years, got the family benefits. And so there's some fairness things on the public safety side, as well as working on some homeland security initiatives that will be coming out this week as well.
The interesting thing we were talking before we started, that you're serving on the same committees. And we'll come to the committees later, though. Let's get back to some of your other bills, Scott, and then we'll talk about those committees.
Yeah, I mean, Senator McPike, he's right. When I went out and was knocking, I knocked about 12,000 doors this last election. The number one issue that people brought up with me after they heard me talk was their concerns about transportation and specifically the hot lanes. And so I've actually put in 3 bills to do some also, I mean, Jeremy's calling it commuter fairness. I think that's the absolute right way to frame it. Number one, I'm trying to confirm that they can only sue you for hot lanes fines within a year of when you violate. Right now, they've been suing people for like $50,000 for about $300-400 of fines. And sometimes they've been waiting more than a year when people can't even remember where they were. And so that's one thing I'm looking to fix. The second thing is to only allow them to step up your fine once you've been convicted. Right now, for example, if you break the law, or if you don't pay because your transponder's broken or your credit card's not up to date and you violate 4 times in 48 hours, the fourth offense, they can sue you for $1,000.
Oh,
so
gee.
The first time they sue you, they come to you for
quick.
Yeah.
Oh, that could happen in the Richmond area.
Yeah.
The
third one I'm looking at is that other states, there's been a lot of concern about the price of tolls. I mean, listen, the hot lane's been great. It's actually reduced commute times to some extent. It's actually made travel more predictable if you can afford them. And I think they have been an improvement. But in some states, what they do is if you're an in-state resident, they give you a discount on your toll, recognizing the Virginia taxpayer investment in the project before they made it available to all these people from out of state. And so I think I have a bill asking VDOT to go back and look at the tolling structures we use in Virginia to see if there's not a way we can give Virginians a discount on tolls. And I've heard that back in Richmond, when I-95 used to be tolled, you used to be able to buy like $100 of tolls for $80 in some little coupon book. I mean, there's things like that I think we can do to make tolling fair for Virginians.
Yeah, you remember that correctly, or you're hearing that correctly. I remember it because I was living here in Richmond at the time, and you could get a discount, and it was nice. And I imagine that when I get down to Florida for spring training baseball and take my unit down there to go through all those tolls, I may be paying more than Florida residents, but that doesn't bother me. But it seems fair that Virginia residents would get somewhat of a break.
Well, some of your viewers from around the state might not realize how big these tolls are that people in Prince William County are having to pay. I drive on the Beltway to work every day, and when I see the sign when I'm coming up to it, the toll to get from the Beltway, from the Mixing Bowl up to the end in Tyson's Corner, usually runs about $18. To come up from Stafford to get up to the Mixing Bowl from the south, usually about $12-15. I had somebody on the Dumfries Council was telling me he had a meeting in Herndon. He went from Dumfries to Herndon. He told me after he went on the toll road to the Mixing Bowl, then the toll road over to the Dulles Toll Road, and then took the Dulles Toll Road to Herndon, it cost him $30 to take that one trip. Saved him a lot of time, but it cost him $30 in tolls. These are big tolls.
Absolutely. We see it every day on 95. It's $5 to $8 depending on where you're going. For really short stretches of miles. Really it is. And if you have to take the full stretch, minimally you're talking $15 to $18 one way.
$18 to get to Stafford.
That's a one-way trip.
And for the viewers here in the central part of the state who know that we do have some tolls, Powhite and Downtown Expressway, those are just set. It doesn't. There's no extra lane you get in to try to bypass some of that. And I understand from some people on those toll roads coming out of Chesterfield and coming into Richmond, the traffic can really get backed up. But they just have to wait it out. But it's a standard toll. It's not one that varies if you take those extra fast lanes.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's one of the complaints, as Senator Surovell sort of pointed out, is sort of the predictability in terms of the calculations used to start at a base of whether it's $5 and literally 5 seconds later, it can switch and be up to $6, $7, $8. And so it's the the variable tolling that folks don't quite know what they're getting into. Now the good thing is once they enter, they're getting charged that rate. The car that's maybe 30 seconds behind them might be at a different rate. So people really are sort of cautious of the unpredictable nature in the variable tolling, and we've also heard that at the doors.
Yep.
Well, before we leave tolls, I was in George Washington's home with some relatives, and coming back down 95, decided I wanted to get back a little quicker, so I kept staying in those extra tolls. And it seems like it was giving me some information, like the amount from here to the next exit was, and I never added those up. It goes on the credit card, but
Right.
but I imagine that was probably $10 or $12 or more using those lanes, even at a time that wasn't the major rush time.
Right.
So
Yeah, rush hour is about $18 off. On the weekends, it's usually between 5 and 8. But and a lot of the feedback I heard was that before they created these hot lanes, people in Prince William County could use those lanes for free because they were HOV during rush hour. But when it wasn't rush hour, anybody could get on them and they didn't have to pay. And so now a lot of people feel like that was taken away from them, and they don't like having to pay for it, which gave me the idea is why we ought to recognize the Virginia's taxpayers' pre-existing investment in that. Bring the toll down for people who built that road to begin with and who made that investment.
Yeah, that's right. I heard from a lot of seniors real quick that, would schedule their appointments based on access and ensuring a quick trip to many of the medical facilities, whether it's Fairfax, Arlington, vets as well, to go to
Fort
vet
Belvoir
centers,
Community Hospital.
to travel up to get veterans care, that are frustrated that they don't have that same access.
They gotta pay for it.
Likewise at night. Now that you might have road construction that's closing down a lane, there's lanes that very few cars are on in the middle of the night, that for them to actually get out of construction traffic, they'd have to be charged for a road they've already paid for. So there's a little tension there, and frustration that they used to have access, and now that's limited and they got to pay. So more to come on that.
Yep.
let's tell our viewers something about one of the new rules changes in the Senate. You're learning the Senate rules, and you are too. And one of the new rules that I was listening to has to do with being able to leave your vote and vote proxy. And many people around the Commonwealth who've been to Richmond know that the House doesn't have that, but the Senate has, you can vote proxy. But as I understand the rule, and you all correct me for our viewers if I'm wrong, you have to be somewhere on Capitol Square.
That's
so
right.
It couldn't be that you've had to leave because of a family emergency and you leave your colleague, your proxy, or you've, for whatever reason, and you're back home. You were here that day, but then you're back home. But you've got to be on Capitol Square, so that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm not used to that at all. I mean, I've been voting for 6 years,
Right.
and
You had to sit there.
I had to sit there, and I'm the only one that could push the button to say how I'm voting. And there's in committees in the House, you can actually come back and vote later if the committee hearing's over, as long as you don't change the result. But nobody votes for me in the House. In the Senate, there's a lot more of that. I guess we're a lot busier, more bills, fewer members. We have to be in more places at the same time, and so they had to do that, be able to meet quorum requirements in committees. If we didn't have it, sometimes committees couldn't even meet because of all the different obligations we have. But yeah, it's it's gonna take some getting used to.
Now, there was another rule change in the Senate. There were several, but one had to do with the press.
Yeah.
And I think at the time we're having this conversation, our viewers will be seeing it later. The time we have this conversation, I think you ask a question of the presiding officer.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. You know that again, I haven't been in the Senate chamber, but it's my understanding that the press used to sit on tables on the floor right in front of the clerk, and I guess we had a rules change this year, which got them off the floor. And in the House, they all sit in the back, and we go back and sit in the chairs and talk to them. But the media today they were sort of mounting a little protest up in the gallery, and where Senator McPike and I were sitting, we were just looking at them the entire time. Our chairs were facing right at him, and one of the reporters had some binoculars. He kept staring at us with binoculars the whole time. And so I brought it up. I was just trying to razz him a little bit because he was clearly doing it intentionally to get our attention.
And for the record, we did not vote for the rules change.
Yeah.
Yes.
That would exclude press from the floor. So,
Yes, well, that's good to know. I mean, that was, the rules usually I've seen are party line votes, and with 21
Right.
Republicans, 19 Democrats, it was a party line vote to make these rule changes, that being one of them. Thank you for pointing
that's
that
right.
out.
Yeah, they also got rid of some proportionality. They took proportionality on committees specifically out of the rules, which was kind of concerning. So now, and they also reduced the size of some committees. There were a couple other little rule changes they made. We
From
didn't.
15 to 13. And
Yeah, we didn't like that.
So what about the committees then? That you're serving on three committees, the same ones. So tell our viewers those. And will some of your bills be coming before your committees?
Yep, general laws and technology. We also have rehab and social services, and then local government. So that there's the three committees that both of us will be serving on. So I have a few in terms of also looking how we can incentivize companies that use apprenticeship programs, in terms of making sure local dollars can go to companies that are investing in workforce development right in their own communities, which is important, especially when we're looking at opportunities in new Virginia economy. And so we're excited about that. That's something that will come to local government as well.
Yeah, and I've got a couple that are coming to general laws. One of the things general laws has is the Freedom of Information Act. And I've introduced 3 pieces of legislation about the Freedom of Information Act. One would allow families who have a member of their family either suffer an unattended death or a suicide. It's another, sometimes you have unattended deaths in homes, but to be able to get a copy of the police report. Right now people can't do that. And I think that's really, as long as there's not a criminal investigation going on, I don't think that's right. A second FOIA bill I'm putting in would say that no local government can use executive session to discuss their salary increases. There was a kerfuffle in Prince William about that this year, where they tried to have their debate about their raise in private until a member complained. I don't think that's right. I think it ought to all be done in public. The third one that's actually a very big bill, supported by the Virginia Press Association. There was a Supreme Court case that came down which said if there's one sentence in a government document which is exempt from FOIA, they can hold back the entire document from the public. I think that's wrong. I think that they can simply produce the document with a redaction, and my bill would require that. Secondly, the Supreme Court also said that a court is required to give the government deference as to whether or not information ought to be exempt. And my bill would say they don't give the government any deference. You don't trust the government when you're getting the information from the government. A court gets to decide and look at it and make its decision, not give anybody any weight. And so I'm really excited about those 2 bills. I'm hopeful, or those 3 bills, I'm hopeful that they'll get some movement.
Yeah, that's interesting that if there's one sentence or one part in there that would allow them to withhold it, that clearly doesn't seem right. I mean, all the attention that around things at the federal level, you get all these redactions from the documents get released.
One Supreme Court justice in the argument, he called it the poison pill. He said, what's to prevent government agencies that don't want documents to become public from sprinkling poison pills all throughout their records?
Oh, yeah.
They don't want taxpayers, Virginians to see. You know, that's what we're incentivizing. And that's the court basically validated that and said that's the law. We need to change that.
Well, along the lines, actually, there's one of the issues that we're facing in FOIA is also access to information, especially with the Homeland Security is such a vital issue. One of the things that I'm working to try to strike a balance, there's some recent studies on vulnerable infrastructure. And the fact is, where we have building permits and other plans that local governments have, in fact, right now, folks can FOIA and get access to them. So we're trying to find a balance of how we can secure critical facilities and also create a little relief valve, where if someone says we're planning to get it, there's at least a process to go to a judge and say, here's why we need this, and a counter argument of, no, here's why this, because it's a critical infrastructure, needs to be held back. Whether it's, we have some critical facilities throughout the Commonwealth, especially with what's going on between ISIS, with different modes, both domestic and foreign, in terms of trying to get down to whether it's rail or power grid infrastructure, other health critical facilities. Having been in local government as well as in the fire service for 16 years, it really only takes, and also in construction for the last 20 years, I'm familiar with sort of the detail that you get in blueprints and plans. And so it really only takes one thing to shut down an entire facility. And so we've got to figure out a way to protect Virginia from access to really critical documents while still respecting a process that allows a relief valve for FOIA. So that's something else I'm working on this year to try to address, again, a little bit from my public safety background that
Right.
is coming to the forefront, but is important.
time's out. Really appreciate the two of you being on This Week in Richmond. We look forward to having you back on again, and best of everything for this session.
Thank you.
Thanks so
for
much,
having
David.
us.
Appreciate it.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.